It is 10:01 p.m.
Yeah.
The streetlights on the boulevard are casting these long, distorted shadows across the freshly manicured lawns.
And it is completely silent.
Totally silent. A father of three, he is covered in flecks of off-white paint, and he's walking down the sprawling driveway of his brand-new $1.3 million dream home.
He had just been inside doing renovations, right?
Exactly. So he walks out into the dark, opens the mailbox, and inside, resting against the cold metal, is a single, thick, white envelope.
Just sitting there.
Just sitting there. There is no return address. The front simply has these clunky, handwritten letters reading, "The new owner."
Which, I mean, that sounds innocent enough at first glance.
Right, he tears the flap open, fully expecting, an invitation to a neighborhood block party or something. Instead, his eyes lock onto a typed manifesto.
A completely terrifying read.
The words just burn into his brain. He reads, "Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me."
It is a sensory nightmare. I mean, the physical weight of that paper, the sudden realization that someone has been watching your children from the darkness, it immediately shatters the foundational reason humans buy homes in the first place, which is physical and psychological safety.
You absolutely have to stick around until the very end of this show to hear the unbelievable and honestly infuriating resolution to this terrifying true story.
It is wild.
We are Mike and Abby, and welcome to Wild Crime Podcasts. We're officially done with boring, slow-burn true crime. We're tearing into the most baffling cases on Earth, untangling the lies, and dropping you right in the middle of the madness.
Whether you are on a long drive, crushing a workout, or just feeling a little bored, we are here to walk you through the mystery and make your next hour incredibly thrilling.
Today, we are examining a massive stack of sources, including the original terrifying letters, FBI behavioral profiling reports, and local court documents, to figure out how the illusion of suburban safety can be destroyed by a single envelope.
And why an entire community eventually turned violently against the victims.
So the location is a crucial variable here, right?
Oh, absolutely. The horror of this situation is amplified tenfold by the geography. We are talking about Westfield, New Jersey in June 2014.
Right.
To really understand the psychological weight of this event, you have to understand Westfield. This is not some transient big city. It is an affluent, fiercely protective enclave just 45 minutes outside of Manhattan.
Yeah, it's like a commuter town for the ultra-wealthy.
Exactly. Residents literally refer to it as a modern-day Mayberry. At the time of this incident, it was ranked as the 30th safest city in the entire United States.
Which makes it the absolute last place you expect to find a relentless, organized stalker.
Right.
For Derek and Maria Broaddus, purchasing 657 Boulevard was supposed to be this massive victory lap.
That was their dream.
Yeah, because Derek grew up in a very modest working-class family in Maine. He spent his entire adult life grinding, climbing the corporate ladder to become a senior vice president at a major insurance firm in Manhattan.
And Maria actually grew up just a few blocks away from 657 Boulevard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so for her, moving into this specific house was a triumphant homecoming. It was the ultimate status symbol of arriving.
And the property totally reflects that status.
Wow.
I mean, 657 Boulevard is a 1905 Dutch colonial revival mansion. It is architecturally imposing.
Huge place.
6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 4 fireplaces, spread out over nearly 3,900 square feet. Yeah. All on almost half an acre of land.
And they purchased it for exactly $1,355,657. It is historic, grand, and meant to be a generational anchor for their family.
Yet on June 5, 2014, just 3 days after closing, before a for sale sign was even planted in the front yard, that first white envelope arrives.
The speed is what is so unnerving.
The speed terrifies me. The sale wasn't public knowledge yet. The ink on the deed is barely dry. How did they know?
Well, the author types the letter but addresses the envelope by hand, which immediately sets this strange, deliberate tone. And the letter initiates a bizarre narrative of this generational obsession with the property. It reads, 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming.
So creepy.
It goes on. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time.
I am stuck on the arithmetic of that claim, though.
What do you mean?
If we assume the writer is in their 50s or 60s, which, the FBI profiler later suggests, then a grandfather in the 1920s and a father in the 1960s creates this perfectly symmetrical 40-year generational passing of the torch.
It almost feels too perfect, right? Like a fabricated mythology.
Exactly. But then the stalker immediately pivots from this historical fantasy to aggressive criticism of the renovations Derek is doing.
Right, because Derek is painting and fixing things up before they move in.
Yeah. The stalker writes, I see already that you have flooded 657 with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You do not want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy.
The personification of the house is deeply unsettling.
It's like the house is alive.
They aren't just protecting a building, they're speaking on its behalf, as if the physical structure has feelings and demands that are being violated by modern contractors.
And then the threat pivots to the most vulnerable targets imaginable, the children.
Yeah, this is where it crosses a massive line.
The writer uses that horrific phrase, young blood. They claim to have counted 3 children so far and ask if there are more on the way, demanding to know, was your old house too small for the growing family, or was it greed to bring me your children?
That word greed is incredibly telling.
How so?
It implies a resentment of the Broaddus family's upward mobility. The writer views the purchase not as a family finding a home, but as an act of gluttonous acquisition that must be punished.
I have a massive problem with the timeline here, though. If someone claims their family has been obsessively terrorizing the occupants of this property for nearly a century, how is it possible the previous owners never uttered a single word of warning?
That is the million-dollar question.
Did the Broadduses just wander blindly into a decades-old trap? Why didn't the sellers disclose this?
The absence of prior warning is exactly what sent Derek Broaddus spiraling. After receiving that first letter, running through the massive house, frantically turning off all the lights and calling the local police.
Which is completely justified.
Oh, totally. But his very next action was to email the previous owners, John and Andrea Woods. He essentially demanded to know what kind of nightmare they had sold him.
If you are watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. If you found a letter like this 3 days after spending your life savings on a home, would you immediately put it back on the market, or would you write it off as a sick prank?
It's a huge financial trap.
That initial threat is terrifying, sure. But what the previous homeowners admit to the next morning will make you completely lose your mind.
So John and Andrea Woods reply the following morning, and their answer is baffling.
What do they say?
They state that they lived in that exact house for 23 years, raised their own children there, and never experienced a single moment of fear.
23 years.
Yeah. They claim the neighborhood was so idyllic they rarely even locked their doors. However, they offer one massive, chilling caveat.
Here we go.
Just days before they moved out, they received a single, remarkably similar letter.
But they didn't report it to anyone.
No. They assumed it was an incredibly poor taste prank by an eccentric neighbor, so they just threw it in the trash and continued packing. They completely dismissed it.
Are you kidding me? They just threw it away.
Yep, into the garbage.
Wow. So the police get involved instantly. Detective Leonard Lugo responds to the Broaddus home, reads the manifesto, and gives them a terrifying directive.
What did he tell them?
He tells both the Broadduses and the Woods family to keep their mouths completely shut. No warning the neighborhood, no asking around.
Because of the details in the letter.
Exactly. Because based on the intimate knowledge of the property, every single person living on that wealthy, manicured street is now a prime suspect.
And that is a terrifying way to live. The first letter relied heavily on historical mythology to create fear. But the subsequent correspondence proved the perpetrator wasn't just casually observing from a car down the street.
No, they were way closer.
They were practically breathing on the window panes.
The family is paralyzed. I mean, they completely stop bringing their kids to the house. Derek cancels his business trips. They are living in a state of hypervigilance in their current, smaller home.
Which is totally understandable.
Exactly 2 weeks later, on June 18th, Maria decides to stop by 657 Boulevard just to check on some paint samples with the contractors.
Right.
She checks the mail, and waiting for her is another thick, white, card-shaped envelope.
The escalation in the second letter is severe. The author now addresses Derek and Maria by their first names, though they conspicuously misspell the last name as Bradduf.
Like they're sounding it out.
Yeah. But the truly paralyzing element is the hyper-specific surveillance data they choose to include this time.
The letter casually lists the children in exact birth order.
Ugh.
It gets worse. It uses their highly specific private nicknames. These were names Maria had only used while calling out to them in the backyard a few days prior.
That is so invasive.
The stalker gloats, "I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me." You certainly say their names often.
And then they deliver a detail that transitions this from a disturbing neighborhood dispute into an active predatory threat.
The Easel.
Yes. The author asks if the daughter is the artist in the family because they specifically observed her using an easel on an enclosed porch.
Here is where the architecture actually betrays the perpetrator.
Right.
We have to examine the physical layout of this property.
Right, because this is key.
This enclosed porch was heavily shielded by thick, mature vegetation. It was virtually invisible from the main street.
You couldn't just drive by and see it.
No, absolutely not. To see that specific easel, you would have to be standing deep inside the Broaddus' own backyard, or looking directly out from the windows of the house right next door.
The spatial constraints of that observation are critical, and yet the author pushes the psychological terror further indoors.
Yeah, they write, will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream.
Before we move forward, we need to pause the timeline and analyze the specific pathology of the person drafting these documents.
What specific psychological wiring produces this type of vicious theatrical correspondence?
We are looking at a profound, almost textbook case of toxic narcissism blended with the delusional entitlement.
Okay, break that down.
This individual feels absolute ownership over a physical space they do not legally possess. By framing themselves as a generational guardian, they are creating a righteous justification for their harassment.
So they think they are the good guy in this story.
Exactly. They are essentially saying, I am not a criminal. I am a protector. It is a facade for an intense desire to exert control over wealthy, successful people. But their pathology contains a fatal flaw.
They can't help but show us.
Yes.
By trying to prove how omnipotent they are effectively drawing a map right to their own front door.
Precisely. This is not the work of a phantom. By bragging about seeing an easel on an obscured, vegetation-hidden porch, they make a catastrophic tactical error.
Right.
They are desperately trying to instill terror, but in the process, they drastically narrow the geographic radius of their potential hiding spot. They're giving law enforcement a literal line of sight.
Because they have to prove they were watching.
It exposes a pathetic, obsessive need to boast, which completely overrides their operational security and self-preservation.
The logic is sound, but the daily reality of that realization is paralyzing for the victims. Think about it. How do you cook dinner? How do you sleep when you know the individual explicitly threatening to harm your children has a direct line of sight into your living space?
You don't. You can't.
So the suspect list is incredibly tight. But just as the police zero in on the house next door, the investigative team uncovers a completely different kind of madness.
The Broaddus family essentially abandons the move. They refuse to bring their children anywhere near the property. They are bleeding money on a massive mortgage for an empty mansion.
Which is just financially ruinous.
Out of sheer desperation, they launch a shadow investigation. They hire highly credentialed private investigators, they install military-grade hidden webcams in the surrounding foliage, and they bring in a heavy hitter. Former FBI behavioral profiler Robert Lenehan.
Lenehan's analysis is brilliant because he doesn't just look at the threats, he looks at the actual mechanics of the writing.
What did he find?
He points out very specific, outdated typing tics. For example, the author uses double spaces after every single period.
The double space is a massive chronological clue.
Why is that?
Well, in the era of manual typewriters, which used monospaced fonts where every letter occupied the exact same width on the paper, typists were rigorously trained to hit the spacebar twice after a period to create a visual break between sentences.
Oh, right, because otherwise it looks like a jumbled mess.
Exactly. But modern word processors automatically adjust kerning, making the double space obsolete. The fact that the author maintains this habit suggests deeply ingrained muscle memory, pointing to an older demographic who learned to type long before the digital age.
Lenehan also notes they address the envelope to M.M. Broaddus, which is a highly formal, antiquated convention.
Nobody writes Mr. and Mrs. as M/M anymore.
Right. And the salutations are jarringly polite, often starting with bizarre weather reports like sunny and cool for a summer day, before immediately pivoting into threats of violence.
It's that juxtaposition that is so disturbing. Furthermore, Lenehan identifies a total absence of profanity across the letters.
Not a single swear word.
Which implies an intellectualized aggression. The writer uses elevated vocabulary as a weapon. They want to appear sophisticated and aristocratic. This linguistic profile strongly suggests a voracious reader, likely in their late 50s or 60s, who views themselves as intellectually superior to the new homeowners.
Armed with this FBI profile and the geographical constraints of the Easel sighting, investigators focus entirely on the neighbors.
And they find someone immediately.
Suspect number 1 is living directly next door, Michael Langford.
The Langford family was an absolute institution on that block. They had resided in their home since the 1960s.
Which aligns perfectly with the author's claim that their father began watching the property in the 60s.
Yes, and furthermore, the patriarch of the Langford family had passed away roughly 12 years prior, which synchronizes with the author's assertion that they took control of the duty for the better part of 2 decades.
The neighbors described Michael Langford as a quintessential Boo Radley figure.
What does that mean in this context?
Well, he had been diagnosed with severe schizophrenia at a young age. Residents reported he had a long-standing habit of wandering through people's yards uninvited or standing on the sidewalk just staring intensely at houses.
That is deeply suspicious behavior.
The kicker. His home had a direct, totally unobstructed line of sight to the enclosed porch where the easel was positioned. Police bring him in for questioning not once, but twice.
The proximity and historical timeline are compelling, but the behavioral profile introduces serious friction here.
How so? Does he not fit?
The letters demonstrate organized, calculated, and highly coherent thought patterns, whereas Michael's schizophrenia reportedly manifested in far more disorganized behavior.
I see.
The police lacked a single shred of physical evidence linking him to the computer-typed documents. His family vehemently defended him, arguing that law enforcement was simply harassing a highly vulnerable, mentally ill man because he was an easy scapegoat.
Without a forensic link, they could not secure a warrant. I'm amazed they couldn't find a digital footprint, but with no hard evidence, they are forced to look elsewhere.
Enter suspect number 2, a local resident we will refer to as the Gamer.
The Gamer, okay.
During a late-night covert stakeout of the Boulevard, investigators notice a vehicle suspiciously idling directly in front of the Broaddus home.
Just sitting there in the dark.
Just idling. They run the plates, tracing it to a young woman in a neighboring town. When detectives interview her, she casually mentions that her boyfriend lives on that very block.
Okay, that's a coincidence.
Then she drops a detail that stuns the investigators. She reveals her boyfriend plays incredibly dark, violent video games online, and his specific user handle is The Watcher.
No way. The odds of that being a coincidence seem astronomically low.
The police contact him immediately. He agrees to come down to the station for a formal interview, but when the time comes, he completely ghosts them. He never shows up.
And because their entire suspicion is based on circumstantial hearsay from his girlfriend, they lack the probable cause to force him into an interrogation room.
They can't just kick his door down for a username.
Right. Which brings us to suspect number 3, an individual who aligns with the FBI's linguistic profile with terrifying precision. Robert Kaplow.
Who is he?
He is a retired high school English teacher and a published novelist residing in a nearby town.
A retired English teacher perfectly fits Lenahan's voracious reader profile.
Yes, but his extracurricular activities are what make him a massive person of interest. Kaplow actively encouraged his high school students to write what he bizarrely referred to as love letters to houses they admired in Westfield.
He had his students doing this.
Yes. He even stood in front of his classes and openly bragged that he had personally written over 50 anonymous letters to another specific historic home in the area.
That behavior demonstrates a deeply romanticized, obsessive relationship with historic real estate.
Exactly.
However, it creates a complex problem for profilers. How do you separate an eccentric, admittedly strange hobby from actionable criminal stalking?
Right, because writing a nice letter isn't illegal.
Investigators determined that Kaplow's known letters were purely appreciative. They lacked the violent, threatening language and the demands for young blood seen in the Broaddus correspondence. There was no concrete bridge connecting his peculiar past behavior to this specific vicious crime.
I also have to mention the lawn chair neighbors, because this details is just so eerie.
Oh, this part is crazy.
Bill Woodward, the professional contractor hired to paint the Broaddus's home, reported a deeply unsettling observation. He noticed an elderly couple living directly behind 657 Boulevard.
Okay.
They kept 2 long chairs positioned right against the property line. But instead of facing their own meticulously landscaped yard, the chairs were turned 180 degrees to face the back of the Broaddus property.
Facing the wrong way.
Woodward said they would just sit there for hours, silently staring at the house.
It creates an atmosphere of suffocating paranoia. When every neighbor exhibits bizarre behavior, the investigation suffers from signal interference. Every glance across a fence line feels like an active threat.
If you are watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. Based on the FBI's linguistic analysis and the geographic constraints of that porch, which of these individuals screams guilty to you? The schizophrenic neighbor with the direct line of sight? The gamer with the identical online handle? Or the English teacher who literally brags about sending anonymous letters to houses?
It is such a bizarre lineup.
We will get into the forensic evidence in a second, but first, you have to realize that just when the investigators felt trapped in a labyrinth of circumstantial suspects, the crime lab drops a bomb that totally derails the entire theory.
The police have hit a wall with interviews, so the forensic lab decides to aggressively test the physical envelopes.
They need anything physical at this point.
They are hunting for anything: a stray fingerprint, a microscopic hair follicle, a skin cell. What they find is a highly viable sample of saliva located on the adhesive underflap of one of the envelopes.
Yes.
They run the DNA through the database. The profile comes back definitively, unmistakably female.
The revelation forces a massive, immediate pivot. The entire investigative lens shifts. They track down Abby Langford, Michael's sister, who happens to be a local real estate agent.
Because maybe she was helping him.
Right. Detectives surreptitiously follow her, collect a plastic water bottle she discards in public, and test her DNA. It is not a match.
So she's cleared.
They approach Andrea Woods, the previous owner who received the initial letter, and ask for a sample. Not a match. They even mandated DNA tests for Maria Broaddus to entirely rule out the theory that the family was fabricating the threats from inside the house.
Yeah.
Not a match.
I'm struggling to understand how this helps, though. Finding female DNA on a stamp flap doesn't definitively prove the author is female.
It creates a massive forensic bottleneck. The watcher could be a woman, or the watcher might be a male who simply had a female accomplice, perhaps a wife or daughter, lick the envelope for him. There is also the distinct possibility that the DNA belongs to an entirely unrelated female postal worker at the Kearney Distribution Center where the mail was processed. It is a piece of evidence that is simultaneously definitive and entirely useless without a comparative match.
Meanwhile, the financial reality for the Broaddus family is becoming catastrophic. By February 2015, they accept that they can never safely inhabit the property.
They just have to cut their losses.
They list it for sale at $1.495 million, hoping to simply cover their purchase price and the extensive renovations. But they make a decision that seals their financial doom.
What do?
They choose to ethically and legally disclose the existence of the threatening letters to all prospective buyers.
Which is the right thing to do morally.
Morally, yes. But predictably, the market reaction is visceral. Buyers sprint in the opposite direction.
Of course they do. Nobody wants to buy a haunted murder house before the murder even happens.
The asking price is slashed repeatedly, but the house remains vacant. In June 2015, exactly 1 year after walking into this nightmare, Derek and Maria file a massive civil lawsuit against the previous owners, the Woods family.
They demand a full refund of their $1.3 million, reimbursement for all renovations, triple damages for emotional distress, and they want the Woods family to retake the title to the property.
The core of their legal argument relies heavily on New Jersey disclosure laws. They argue that because the Woods family received a letter days before closing, they had material knowledge of a stalker.
Which they withheld.
Yes. By actively hiding that information, the Broaddus's claim the Woods committed real estate fraud.
The legal mechanics of this lawsuit are fascinating, but the court does not side with the victims. Judge Camille Kenny ultimately dismisses the case.
On what grounds?
She rules on the precedent of off-site social conditions. In New Jersey, you must disclose physical defects, like a cracked foundation or a toxic mold infestation. However, the judge rules that a single, vaguely threatening letter received by a family who lived there peacefully for 23 years does not constitute a known, persistent, objective threat that legally demands disclosure.
So they're just stuck with the house.
The financial ruin is bad enough, but the way this entire town violently turns against a family fighting for their lives is honestly the darkest part of this story.
This public lawsuit is the catalyst that destroys whatever peace the Broaddus family had left. A local reporter discovers the court documents, publishes the horrific quotes from the letters, and the story instantly goes viral.
It explodes.
Dozens of news trucks flood the quiet, pristine streets of Westfield. And this is the exact moment the affluent, image-obsessed community actively turns against the victims.
Why turn on them, though? They're the ones being stalked.
It is a sociological immune system response. The town perceives the media attention as an infection that threatens their property values and their manicured reputation. But instead of attacking the virus, the anonymous stalker, they attack the symptoms.
They attack the Broaddus family because they're the ones making the town look sick to the outside world.
Exactly. The rumors become vicious. Neighbors openly accuse Derek and Maria of orchestrating a massive hoax.
A hoax.
They theorize that the Broadduses overextended themselves financially, realized they couldn't afford the exorbitant mortgage, and fabricated a phantom stalker to either void the contract, sue for a profit, or land a lucrative Hollywood movie deal.
It is a textbook example of victim blaming, fueled entirely by the protection of wealthy suburban aesthetics. But we must acknowledge that the psychology of affluent enclaves often breeds a very specific, entitled type of hostility.
Very true.
We can examine a chilling parallel that occurred right around the same time in nearby Cresskill, New Jersey.
The Kushner case.
Yes, the Kushner case is the perfect counterargument to anyone who thinks stalkers only live in basements. David and Nancy Kushner, a highly wealthy, socially prominent couple, were criminally charged with stalking and sending anonymous, traumatizing death threats to a local high school basketball coach.
And what was their motive?
The motive. The coach simply wasn't giving their teenage son enough playing time on the court.
Are you serious?
Dead serious. They sent letters explicitly threatening the coach's young children, utilizing hyper-specific details to inflict maximum psychological damage over a high school sport.
The Cresskill parallel demonstrates that the watcher does not have to be a stereotypically unhinged, destitute recluse.
No.
The perpetrator could easily be a wealthy, entitled suburbanite, a prominent doctor, a lawyer, or a neighborhood socialite who harbors a petty, entirely irrational grievance.
Like they didn't like the paint colors Derek was using.
Perhaps they despised the specific architectural renovations, or they resented the fact that new money was moving into their historic district. For these individuals, anonymous terror is simply a weapon of convenience used to enforce their worldview.
Let's dissect the hoax theory for a moment, because it collapses the second you apply basic logic.
It makes zero sense.
Why on earth would someone attempt to fake a crime to escape a mortgage by spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on renovations, hiring elite former FBI agents, racking up crushing legal fees in a civil suit they lost, and purposefully destroying the resale value of the very asset they're trying to liquidate?
Exactly.
If it was a scam to secure a movie deal, it is mathematically the worst business plan in history.
The financial logic of the hoax theory is non-existent. Furthermore, it completely ignores the clinical diagnoses of severe, debilitating depression and PTSD that both Derek and Maria received from their medical professionals.
They were suffering
Deeply. However, the relentless, suffocating pressure from the stalker, compounded by the vicious ostracization from their own neighbors, eventually pushed the Broaddus family to the absolute brink.
The psychological fallout is so heavy. But first, you have to hear the desperate plan they pitched to the town just to get out of this nightmare.
By the end of 2016, the Broadduses are completely cornered. The house will not sell, they are terrified to live in it, and they are drowning in dual mortgages. They construct a radical exit strategy and present it to the Westfield Planning Board.
What's the plan?
They ask for municipal permission to tear down the historic 1905 mansion, completely bulldoze it, and split the large lot into two smaller properties to sell to developers.
This proposal requires a specific zoning exception because the newly proposed lots would fall just a few inches under the town's mandated width requirements.
Just a few inches.
The neighborhood response is not just negative, it is aggressively hostile.
Yeah.
In January 2017, over 100 Westfield residents pack into a grueling 4-hour planning board meeting to fiercely protest the demolition.
Over 100 people for a zoning meeting.
Yes. The residents argue that tearing down the home will destroy the historic aesthetic of the boulevard and negatively impact their own property values. Maria Broaddus, standing in the town she grew up in, looks at her neighbors and explicitly tells them they are prioritizing the aesthetic of a building over the safety and mental survival of her family.
And what did the board do?
The board listens to the angry mob and unanimously rejects the proposal.
This rejection is the ultimate breaking point. The stalker's campaign of psychological warfare has successfully shattered Derek's resilience.
He is completely broken.
He is suffering from severe clinical depression, he is highly paranoid, and he feels entirely abandoned and betrayed by his community. In this desperate, profoundly isolated state, he makes a highly destructive, impulsive choice.
On Christmas Eve, under the cover of darkness, Derek Broaddus walks through his neighborhood and anonymously hand-delivers letters into the mailboxes of the neighbors who had been the most vocal in criticizing his family online.
He becomes a letter writer himself.
He types them up and signs them Friends of the Broaddus family. In these letters, he wildly accuses his neighbors of domestic terrorism and severe mental illness. He is blindly lashing out.
We must deeply analyze Derek's mental state here because this is crucial.
Go ahead.
This represents the tragic moral injury of the victim. The trauma has fully infected him. The watcher utilized anonymous, cowardly psychological warfare to break the family. Derek, in his absolute lowest moment of despair, adopts the exact same toxic methodology as his abuser.
He sank to their level.
He didn't suddenly become a criminal mastermind who fabricated the original threats. He became a deeply broken man resorting to the only weapon he felt he had left. Anonymity is the tool of the powerless.
Right.
Ironically, this monumental lapse in judgment only served to completely validate the town's skepticism when he later confessed to writing these retaliatory letters to a journalist from New York Magazine.
It is a devastating self-inflicted wound. He admitted his actions, stating he was deeply ashamed and hadn't even told his wife, but he was drowning. If you are watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. After hearing about Derek sending his own anonymous letters, does it change your mind about the whole case? Did the town break him, or was he always capable of deception?
People are going to have strong opinions on that, but the true watcher was far from finished.
Oh, not even close.
Since the demolition was blocked and the sale was dead, Derek and Maria managed to find a family willing to rent the property in early 2017.
The renters are a brave couple. They own large protective dogs, and they publicly state they are not intimidated.
Exactly 2 weeks after the renters moved their belongings in, letter 4 arrives.
They are back.
And the tone has undergone a drastic, terrifying evolution. It is no longer just historically obsessive. It is violently unhinged, clearly provoked by the intense media coverage and the thwarted demolition attempt.
The author's gloating. They write, 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the Boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard.
And then they pivot to explicitly physical, violent threats.
Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break.
The introduction of physical violence, the explicit mention of bones breaking, feeds directly into a deep-seated historical trauma that permanently haunts the town of Westfield.
Because the violent language in this letter feels distinct. When they talk about bones breaking in this specific town, it's hard not to feel the historical echo of what happened in 1971.
You cannot fully comprehend the town's hyperreaction to a perfect home turning into a nightmare without understanding the legacy of John List.
Break that down for people who don't know the local history.
It is the dark undercurrent of the entire region. In 1971, just a few miles away from 657 Boulevard, at a massive mansion named Breeze Knoll on Hillside Avenue, a seemingly mild-mannered Sunday school teacher and insurance accountant named John List systematically executed his entire family.
His entire family.
He murdered his wife, his mother, and his 3 children. He meticulously arranged their bodies in sleeping bags in the grand ballroom, cleaned the crime scene, turned on a classical music radio station, and vanished without a trace for nearly 18 years.
18 years on the run.
He later claimed he committed the atrocities to save their souls from the shame of his impending financial ruin.
The town of Westfield has carried the psychological scar tissue of the John List murders for decades. The intense anxiety, the paranoia, and the rapid hostilities surrounding the Watcher case are absolutely fueled by this collective memory.
The residents fundamentally know that behind the beautiful, wealthy facades of these massive colonial homes, unimaginable, calculated horrors can and have occurred.
The prolonged psychological and financial toll finally forces the Broaddus family into total capitulation. In July 2019, they make the agonizing, defeatist decision to sell 657 Boulevard to a couple named Andrew and Allison Carr for $959,000.
Let's do the math on that devastation. They purchased the home for $1.35 million. That is a crushing $400,000 loss on the sale price alone.
And that doesn't even factor in the hundreds of thousands of dollars they incinerated on contractors, private investigators, military-grade security systems, and endless legal fees.
It is absolute financial ruin.
It forces us to examine the nature of prolonged victimization. It shows how targeted, relentless psychological terror can alter a person's moral compass and completely destroy their financial stability, while the perpetrator seemingly evaporates into the ether without consequence.
Which brings us to the most chilling, lingering realization of this entire, deeply unsettling investigation.
What's that?
The Carr family, who purchased the house at a massive discount in 2019, moved in. They have been living there for years now, and according to all public reports, they have never received a single letter from the watcher.
Nothing.
Not a single envelope. This absence of correspondence forces us to confront a truly disturbing hypothesis.
Was the author ever actually obsessed with the history of the physical structure, as they repeatedly claimed?
Or was this entire elaborate campaign a highly targeted, deeply personal attack, specifically engineered to break Derek and Maria Broaddus?
Or did the Watcher simply achieve total victory? Did they successfully weaponize fear to drive out the new money buyers who dared to bring in contractors to alter the historic architecture?
It's entirely possible.
Maybe the author accomplished exactly what they set out to do, and now they were just settling back into the quiet, wealthy shadows of Westfield, silently watching the new family from behind the manicured bushes, entirely satisfied with their dominance.
It is the ultimate unresolved tension. The illusion of safety was shattered, the victims were exiled, and the architect of that terror remains a ghost, perfectly assimilated back into the mundane fabric of suburban life.
All right, if we made your drive, your workout, or your downtime even a little bit better today, do us a massive favor. Whether you are watching on YouTube, streaming on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or literally anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button right now. We drop episodes like this frequently, bringing you the most fascinating cases in the most interesting way possible. Lock in, because you do not want to miss the crazy mysteries we've queued up for next time. See you then.